Hello, my name is Roman Dzindzichashvili, and this is first video of series on English opening. Now, when you say English, all we know that it starts with move c4. Obviously, black has varieties of transposing to e6 and d5, which is kind of a Queen's Gambit family position, which can transpose itself into Catalan. And there is also a way to play with c6, but this is not going to be English. English is not something white will play if they want to. It takes two people to play English. Black has to cooperate to go into English. And in English, we have, typical English, we have two main moves, e5 and c5. e5 is almost always English. c5 may transpose to various different openings. So today's topic, we're going to talk about c4, e5. And this is ages-old position, and it can be played various different ways. Well, we are talking about the most popular move, knight c3, but frequently white lately plays g3, delaying knight c3, and the reason for it, they delay black's opportunity to play bishop b4. But now, after this moves, knight c3 is kind of forced move because e3 is really bad because it weakens light squares such as d3 square. So then white does have to play knight c3, which will transpose to English. But the main move is the old move and was played maybe like 90% of the time. But before we get to this move, I want to tell you a little bit about knight f3 move. This is not the move that I like for white. This is not the good move, but it can be played. It was played by Larsen against very important match, USSR versus rest of the world against Spassky, e4, knight d4. And actually what happened, this type of position, where black is doing fine with development, they have good pawn structure, double pawn on c5 only helps their pieces to breed freely. So, knight f3 is not the move we want to analyze. Also, the strategy I took in explaining this part of English, the strategy I chose is, let's talk mostly about something I have to offer for white or black, something new I have to offer. Because everything else in English you can pick up from almost from any book that has openings explained. So knight f3 is not something we want to discuss, and knight c3. And we all know that for a number of years, very popular continuation for black was bishop b4. Actually, in this position, g3 may be one of the ways to stop bishop b4 by black on a second move. But there is no reason to be afraid of bishop b4 variation. On bishop b4, for white, I would strongly recommend knight d5 move. However, I also have played other ways, such as knight f3 is reasonably good move. And well, let's talk about knight d5. This is most controversial and most ambitious continuation. And here, bishop a5 was main move, but black got kind of discouraged playing bishop b5 based on the games were played and started playing bishop e7. Well, let's talk at bishop a5. Now, we can bring dozens of games here, analyze this and that continuation. I will give you a quick review. What is the best for white? It's kind of quick overview. b4, and there are two moves, bishop b6 or c6. I tell you that bishop b6 doesn't look very promising because after knight takes b6 and bishop b2 and on d6, d4, white gets possession of this diagonal. They have two bishops and a strong center. White is clearly better. Only way to get some kind of a counterplay, a little bit unbalanced position, is a c6 move. White takes, black takes, and cd, and queen takes a5. Now, attacking d5 pawn. White has such a move as queen b3. An actually interesting move and possible, but what I want to tell you, I would not recommend to play this for black. And the strategy we take in explaining English is, if I don't recommend, it's like for your repertoire. If I don't recommend it for black, that means we should look at this position for white only. And once we look for white, we should find the easiest way out of the opening with some kind of an advantage. And for that, I recommend e4 move. After knight f6, attacking e4 pawn. Not bishop d3, although it's possible move. f3 is positionally very solid and very strong. On d6, knight e2. And when black castles, there is bishop b2. It gives big advantage to white. And I don't think this position is playable at all for black. On knight a6, we don't go knight c3, we go bishop c3. And now on queen d8, you have very, very pleasant choice to go d4 and opening your dark square bishop, and if ed, then take back with a knight, or simply go knight g3, then develop the bishop and slowly prepare attack on the king side. Both moves, knight g3 and d4, offer white pretty big advantage. And this position cannot be seriously taken for black. That's why we can see this only on a lower level. So on a little higher level, move that played bishop e7. Well, on a bishop e7, also, of course, there is a variety of ways you can play. Let me suggest one that will guarantee you better position quickly. Knight f3, d6, d4, immediately planning attack on black center, and black has to go e4. Now, after e4, there are two ways we can get better position. One is knight d2, f5, and now move I like the best, not playing e3, but playing knight d2 to b1. You see, you're going to get the dark square bishop on e7 anyway, and then you want to put bishop on f4 and knight on c3. That's how you solve bishop on c1 and knight on d2 placement. Knight goes to c3 and bishop goes to f4 before we play b3. This is one way. And after knight b1, you clearly have advantage. For example, c6, take, knight c3, knight f6. You can go bishop f4, or you may go g3 and bishop g2. Even e3 if you play. Eventually, white's dark square bishop can go after b4 to b2, bishop b2. Also, the other way I like also very much in this position to play knight g1 with all the same ideas. Now we're going to get black's dark square bishop. We're going to put bishop on f4, and knight will operate from g1 going to e2 or maybe h3. White clearly has an advantage. There is no forced variation, just very promising position for white. So this is more or less covering the bishop b4 way. And again, when we say covering, of course, there is a lot more to bishop b4 move. But this is as much as you need to know for white, and I repeat, I don't recommend it for black. And if you know this, you're going to be okay. You don't need to know a whole bunch of different variations that you are not going to play. Now, after c45, knight c3, there is knight f3 move, and white again has an option to go g3 or to go knight f3. There are only two more or less credible options, g3 or knight f3. Well, let's start with the move knight f3, and black goes knight c6. Now, this is very interesting position, full of life, and white has several options here. One of the options is e4 that I don't like that much. Of course, white has an advantage after bishop c5 and knight takes e5, because that's not the way black's supposed to play. Because now bishop takes f2, that simply gives big advantage to white. This is not a good way to play for black. But after bishop b4, I don't think white has any advantage. And this recommendation is not just for white, but for black as well. If somebody plays e4, I recommend you to play bishop b4. So this video is not English for white. I'm reminding you, this is English overview, and the points have to be, interesting points have to be taken for white and for black. e4 is not my choice in this position, and it's not, by far, not the best move. After bishop b4, d3, d6, and bishop e2, bishop c5, black is doing fine. They lost tempo putting bishop on c5, but tempo doesn't matter here that much because of the general principle. It says tempo is not as important in closed position. And this is perfect example of closed position. On bishop e3, black simply castles, and they have fine position. I'm not saying black has an advantage. Black is doing just fine. So e4 is not an option. That means white can play here g3, e3, d3, or a3. Actually, a3 is also, it makes sense because it stops black's bishop b4, and it's making kind of a waiting move. I don't like a3. I wouldn't recommend you to play a3 or e3 variations. And here is why. On e3, best move for black is not to play d5, of course, because then we're getting kind of variety of Sicilian reverse with extra tempo for white. And after bishop b5, white may get clear advantage. And if you have a3 played in your game, move that I strongly recommend is bishop e7. And now, if white plays bishop e2, then you castle. Well, If white played on a previous move d4, you simply take and go d5. You have absolutely no problem. But if white plays bishop e2, you castle. And the same, on d4, you take. And if pawn takes, you go d5. And interesting, it happened in my game too. Knight takes d4. Knight takes d4. And again, on ed, you want to play d5, having good position. And on queen d4, b6. Actually, this is very interesting position. After bishop c5, queen d3, you can go c6. And if white castles, bishop a6. Actually, this is quite good position for black. They have no problem. They want to go d5. And it's hard to recommend for white. White has absolutely no advantage in this position. So this is not my choice, e3. Well, g3 is one move that should be taken very seriously, but this is variety. If black goes d5, we have variety of accelerated dragon with extra tempo for white. I don't think black should play d5. I think black should play here bishop b4, and g3 is one very valid option. My personal preference, and when I say preference, it does not mean that I like those positions better. They have an advantage because I like to play any type of Sicilian position with extra tempo. On d5, we can take cd, knight takes d5, and go back to dragon with extra tempo, or play e3 and go to Scheveningen type of positions with reversed color and extra tempo for white. And how to play this position, it's all different science. So if you played Sicilians and you like to play Sicilian for black, you should be liking this position where you have an extra tempo. Otherwise, on d3, if black plays bishop b4, then bishop d2. And on castling, you continue playing your Sicilian setup. And now after bishop takes e4, you can simply take knight takes e4 and go rook c1 or queen c2. This is very credible, good, and easy to play position for white. So we covered few different options that white has. Now I want to show you some options that I wouldn't exercise for white. For example, in this position, d4 move. D4 move was very popular several decades ago. I personally don't think white has any advantage here. ed, knight takes d4, not bishop c5, where white can play knight takes c6 and g3, but not bishop c5, but bishop b4. And now, most controversial move, the only move for white to fight for advantage, bishop g5. This is old variation that was played by white, and white has done well for a number of years. Now, if you go start searching database, you can find, I don't know about thousands, but hundreds of games played on any level, and you can find some good wins for white, and you're going to be very, very confused. So what is the best way? I have a summary for you here. The best way to play this position for black is h6, bishop h4, bishop takes c3, bc, and since the spin of bishop on h4 against queen on d8 may be very painful in number of variations, we should go knight e5 immediately intending knight g6. Now you intend knight g6 and break the pin and play against damaged pawn structure of whites. Now, after 95 was played, there was, well, a bunch of games played with knight e5. f4, that's the attempt to get an initiative. Knight g6, bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, and g3. Now, this position, there were quite a few games were played. What I don't like for black is castle. Then white goes bishop g2, and after d6, white castles. And you see, we have a problem of developing bishop on c8, and also knight on g6 stands poorly. And I think white is a bit better here. They can go rook b1, b7 pawn is kind of problem, and knight on g6 as well. So I did some research and I analyzed this position. After white played g3, much better move than castling is knight f8. And again, position is kind of closed. You don't expect any battle in its center in next several moves. Knight f8, we go immediately before black castles, and f8 square will be occupied by black rook. Knight f8 is very strong move. After bishop g2, knight e6. And when white castles, we castle. Now what we're going to do, we are not going to have problem with our b7 pawn. We're going to go knight c5, pawn d6, and rook e8. White has no advantage at all. One interesting attempt here, instead of castling, if white goes f5, and after knight c5, they go knight to b5. Well, now after knight b5 and king d8, we have to guard c7 pawn, and queen d8 is not an option because of queen d4. Attacking knight on c5, pawn on g7. That's why we go king d8. But that's perfectly okay because knight will be driven back to d4. Black is going to go d6, rook e8. They have good outposts for knight on c5. White has numerous pawn weaknesses. Weak pawn on f5, and double pawns on c-file, backwards e-pawn. And in my opinion, black is clearly better in this position. So this is just a few pointers of playing these positions for white and for black. I played English opening, I don't know, without exaggeration, over 30 years for both sides. On c4, e5, I played most of the time, as well as King's Indian, and I played c4 to nowadays. Whatever I play once in a while. Even now, I do play c4. And I know quite a bit there, and this is my observation. I'm trying to bring you material, give you material important, not too big of a material that you can easily learn and get along with the English opening. And I will tell you again that the rest of the critical variations you can pick up from the book if you need it. Otherwise, this is our first observation and our first part of English. We will continue this with the second chapter of this opening. Thank you very much, and I will see you soon.